Hey, welcome back to Ecommerce On Tap, brought to you by Sourcify and ISBA. I'm your host, Nathan Resnick, joined by my co-host, Aaron Alpeter. Aaron, for those that are tuning in for the first time of Ecommerce On Tap, do you mind giving a quick overview of what we do?
Absolutely. So each week we profile a well-known company. We tell their founding story, reverse engineer their supply chain, then talk about their exit potential.
So this week we are covering Rare Beauty, which is a, you know, cruelty vegan company or beauty brand started by Selena Gomez. And so it's going to be a pretty cool episode to dive in to kind of this creator-led, celebrity-led brand. I think there's a lot of talk around celebrity-led commerce and creator-led commerce. But before we do, just curious if there was any kind of tidbits that caught your eye the past week.
Yeah, a really interesting one because it's the intersection of brand and supply chain. But Nike has an oversupply problem. I don't know if you saw this, but I know you're a sneakerhead, and so I immediately thought of you when I saw this. But they have really built their business on some of their lines, like the Air Jordans or the Air Force Ones, around scarcity. Right? It was one of these things where they intentionally did not make more than they could sell. And as a result, this was a status item. It was something that, like, wow, you got the new Jordans. That's awesome. And so these shoes for the longest time have been collector's items, and there's been a massive resale market for these shoes. Well, about a year ago, Nike decided that they wanted to lean into these franchises a little bit more and turn each of them into a multi-billion-dollar franchise. And so they did report $51 billion in sales this last year, but in the process, they kind of traded long-term value for short-term growth, and they diluted their brand pretty dramatically on these lines. And so, because these shoes have become more commonplace, they've run into a situation where Nike now makes more Jordans than they're able to sell. And it used to be that you could take these shoes, you could sell them on StockX or Goat and make a profit. And Nike has their own app. I don't know if you've used it, called Sneakers. But when these shoes would go up on the Sneakers app, they usually would sell out within seconds. And now they're like in stock and always there, and just kind of there. Well, Nike stock has taken a beating. They're slowing down quite a bit. Their CEO just announced that they're stepping down, and it's just this really interesting conversation around how much supply is too much supply. A lot of times in supply chain, we think about, like, the worst thing that's possible is to run out of inventory, and for most products that's true. But when you have something that is a borderline luxury item, and you have something that is really meant to be a status symbol, making too much of it actually destroys that brand. And I wouldn't bet against Nike, but I don't know how they're going to turn this around, because they've really damaged themselves for the next 5 years at least.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot goes into the brand, right? I mean, as a sneakerhead, you see my Nike SB wall behind me. I have been a collector since like middle school, right? I mean, Nike SBs is always what I've loved and collected, and I think the sneaker market kind of fluctuates. Like, at least the collector market category in the sneaker market kind of fluctuates based on market conditions, right? Like during ZIRP and zero interest rate environments, like the cost of collector Nike SBs was like insane. It was just through the roof. And I think it's definitely come down a bit, but there's still some collectors that just like hold and admire the shoes like me. And I think overall, like, yeah, of course, when you oversupply, there's kind of that mismatch between oversupplying and then, if there's too much supply, how can this really become like a collector or like a hyped upon shoe? So yeah, it's a pretty interesting take. For me, I feel like I've got to mention SpaceX. I mean, I don't know a more impactful company than SpaceX. Like, it's just incredible. I mean, I follow them pretty closely, and I wish I was an investor because, on one hand, you have SpaceX going to the International Space Station and saving, astronauts that were stranded basically by their previous capsule that I think was it Boeing that was
Of
contracted
course, it was Boeing.
yeah, that was contracted to produce that other capsule that they deemed unsafe to have these astronauts travel back to Earth in. So you have that incredible feat, basically saving astronauts on the International Space Station. And on the other hand, you have this devastating hurricane, Helen, that just ripped through so many communities and just completely destroyed them, and leaving them without not only without electricity, without water, without really things they need to survive, but also without internet, right? And so you have Starlink that's powered by SpaceX now providing internet to these communities that are in disaster zones. And I think without Starlink, like we wouldn't be hearing from these people, you know? I mean, you see stuff on Twitter of like, hey, I'm able to, post this and record this video because I've got Starlink, right? And so, I mean, I just think it's so incredible. And I think, for me as a founder, when I hear, companies like SpaceX, I'm kind of like, dang, like I wish I was doing something that had that much impact, right? It's just pretty incredible. I mean, does that kind of like when you hear those stories, Aaron, and for you as a founder, does that kind of make you feel like, okay, maybe I should try to do something a bit more impactful?
Um, I think it's super inspiring. I think that the thing, love him or hate him, the thing that Elon Musk is good at is having a vision of the future and then making that a reality. And whether it was with electric cars, whether it was with PayPal, whether it's with what he's doing with Twitter, he has a perspective and he makes it happen. And so, I mean, yeah, I hadn't made the connection that, within a week, SpaceX was rescuing people in space and was, one of the critical pieces of infrastructure for a natural disaster. And that's pretty remarkable.
Yeah, it's incredible. I mean, it really is. So I admire it a lot, and just had to mention that. But today we're covering Rare Beauty. So it's a cosmetics brand. I mean, I think most of our listeners skew male, so they might not have heard of Rare Beauty, but it is a huge beauty brand that we're going to cover. We're also covering the history of beauty, like how did this, really come to be, like how are people just spending tens of billions of dollars a year on cosmetics and beauty. But I think what's most interesting to me, because I've been following this trend of like creator-led commerce, is just like this dynamic, right? Because on one hand, you hear the viral success of like Logan Paul and Prime, or Mr. Beast and Feastables. But then on the other hand, too, right? You hear like Mr. Beast and his like Beast Burger, like that was a fail, right? I mean, they couldn't figure out that supply chain to manage that customer satisfaction and that brand to continue going with that Beast Burger concept, right? And so I think it's just this interesting dynamic of it, in my opinion, there's kind of like so many success stories that we hear where it's like, oh yeah, take a creator or celebrity that has a huge audience and let's just stick a product on them and they'll sell it to their audience. But there's also this dynamic of that not working and the product not resonating with their audience. So I mean, I guess to start, I'm curious, like, number one, what has stuck out to you in the creator commerce economy? And then number two, like, are there any kind of celebrity led or creator led brands that you think of that have failed, either because supply chain issues like Beast Burger, or because just the audience and product didn't fit?
Yeah, there is an article that I saw last year. I'll have to find it and put in the show notes, but it was basically going through and looking at all of the celebrity brands that have been created in the beauty space. And they were looking at it over the course of the last 10 or 15 years. It was something like only 20% of them had survived. And survived meaning that they were actually viable, they were ongoing. Everybody looks to Kylie Cosmetics and says, I want that, right? That's what they go after. And so it's actually not as simple as just saying, well, I've got this audience, let me go sell these things. And I think the reason that most brands fail is because the celebrity is not actively engaged in the brand. It doesn't come across as an authentic thing. And I always go back to Cristiano Ronaldo doing advertisements for KFC. And you can't convince me that the pictures of him holding a bucket of chicken on the soccer pitch were like, he would be doing that if he wasn't being paid millions of dollars for it. And so that's kind of sticks out as like, I guess it's good advertising because I remember it and I'm talking about it, but it's not something that he would be doing on his own, right? And so I think that for these celebrity-led brands to really do well, it has to be something that is personal to that celebrity, something that they're going to lean into, they're going to talk about, that the people can connect with, versus just putting their name on something.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think there's also cases where, like, I follow Sean Neff and he's done like a few different brands, like with Florence Bobby Mills and like Millie Bobby Brown. Like they've got a cosmetics brand, and they did base travel. They've got some big wins under that group, but they also have like ones that are doing okay, but not great. Like I know they launched like a toothpaste brand called Moon, I think it's called, with Kendall Jenner, that it seems to be doing all right, but it's not like this rocket ship of a brand that most kind of creator led brands try to become. And then I know other brands like Danny Duncan, a big YouTuber with like, I think 7 or 8 million subscribers, launched this like kind of 4 hour energy competitor called Matador. And it seems like it's doing all right, but it doesn't seem like it's like taking off. It's not like the next, big thing, right? It's not like outpacing 4 hour energy. Whereas I think if you consider like Prime versus Gatorade, like, yeah, Prime's trajectory versus Gatorade is like pretty insane. So I think there's that kind of dynamic where, I think every founder now needs to look at this kind of category and say, okay, if I'm interested in launching a beauty brand or interested in launching, a hydration product or, whatever it may be, there's definitely an angle there to partner with a creator and bring them on board and try to utilize their audience to see, okay, can we get better, CPMs? Can we get higher click-through rates because they, resonate with this persona? I mean, there's a lot that goes into it that I think founders should really consider. Even if you have an existing brand that has like plateaued, right? Let's say you've got a brand that's plateaued
Sure.
at like 5 to 10 million revenue, and you're like, okay, I don't know how to get this to the next level. Maybe you need to bring in a creator to take it to the next level, right? I think it was Ridge Wallets did that with a really famous YouTuber as
Mhm.
well, to kind of put this person in as their chief creative officer. So, I mean, I love this model, and I'm excited to dive in here because it's pretty fascinating to see.
Well, let's compare two of those. So Logan Paul in Prime is doing well because what is Logan Paul known for? Well, he's first and foremost known as an athlete, as a boxer. He's got, he posts workout videos. He posts, athletic videos. Now he has a podcast as well, but like that's what he's known for. And so the energy drink makes sense. Mr. Beast and the Beast Burger, Mr. Beast is known for like funny YouTube videos and just doing wacky stuff. He's not really known as somebody who sits down and eats burgers. And so that connection for the audience and what's seen as authentic is a little bit different. And I think by far the best kind of brand that's done this is Hexclad and Gordon Ramsay. I mean, if you just think about Gordon Ramsay and all that equity he's built is around cooking and doing really well. And he was not a founder of Hexclad. But if you ask people, they'd probably think, oh, yeah, that's Gordon Ramsay's brand. He started that.
Yeah, that's a really good point. That's a great example too, Hexclad and Gordon Ramsay. So I guess, diving in here with Rare Beauty, I mean, I'm curious, like, what is kind of the history of beauty here?
Yeah. So the interesting thing about beauty standards is that they have changed a lot over time. And, just a good example is it used to be that uh, in the Middle Ages, the fatter you are, the more attractive you were seen because, that showed wealth. It showed that you had lots of food. And so people tended to go toward heavier body types. That's changed, right? And so, now there's more of an emphasis on being skinny. So it kind of goes back and forth with all these different things. And the current cycle that we're in really started in the 1700s, and it was heavily influenced by an author named Johann Winkelmann. He lived from 1717 to 1768, and he was probably one of the most impactful people that you've never heard of. And he's considered the father of modern art history and classical archaeology. And he published a book in 1764 called The History of Ancient Art. And this was a pivotal book in shaping European conceptions of beauty. And what he did is he critiqued art, he critiqued sculpture particularly, and he really focused in on classical Greek and Roman statues and talked about how this is the quintessential form. This is perfect. This is perfection. And so he talked about the proportions. He talked about the human form. He talked about the harmony of how these things work together. And you think about, there wasn't any internet at that point. These books were really what was going through. And he had a huge impact, not only on the beauty standards, but you think about why does the White House look the way it does? Why does Congress look the way it does? Well, this same book also gave birth to the neoclassical movement in architecture. And so just an idea of what was so important about this guy and what he was able to do. And that shaped the perception of beauty from basically the founding of before this country all the way to the present day. Anything stick out to you? Have you heard about Johann Winkelmann before?
No, I hadn't. I mean, it's super interesting to kind of hear his, impact and what he's kind of done for the whole industry. I mean, I didn't even know of him. No, that's news to me.
Yeah, it's a really fascinating thing. But let's fast forward because that really sets the stage where beauty standards have changed. we're in a cycle, and the current cycle started in the 1700s. And so let's fast forward to the early 20th century. Well, basically, beauty was defined in much the same way as it had been for the last few hundred years. It was very Eurocentric ideals. We epitomized a kind of that European look, right? High cheekbones, light skin, those sorts of things. There really wasn't any representation in any sort of marketing for diverse races, diverse body types, disabilities, things like that. That starts to change a little bit in the 1960s with the civil rights movement in the US. And you start to see some brands in the beauty industry start to show a different path. And so there were brands like Fashion Fair and Flory Roberts that started to specifically cater to African American women. And it was a good first step in inclusivity, but it was fueled more by business reasons than by trying to change the concept of beauty. And you kind of fast forward to the 1990s, and there is a little bit more of a conversation that's happening around body positivity and mental health. And you start to see, conversations in the late 1990s, early 2000s about, Dove does their big campaign about body positivity and self-image. You start to see eating disorders become more talked about. And this is really going from the fringe of what models would kind of suffer with in quiet to more of a mainstream where, the average woman didn't look like a model. And they're saying, hey, it's okay. Like, let's talk about and celebrate that. In the 2000s, you start to see this change much more dramatically. So inclusive beauty becomes something that starts to take hold. And MAC, one of the largest cosmetics companies, begins doing a lot of campaigns to talk about not only mental health and health issues, but AIDS and trying to help marginalized communities in general. In 2010, you start to see mental health advocacy grow within the beauty industry, and lots of celebrities start sharing their personal stories about dealing with depression or anxiety or body dysmorphia or these other things that have really been weighing on them to look or act a certain way that was literally a statue is what they're going. 2017 is a watershed moment. So Fenty Beauty, launched by Rihanna, they were really known as launching with 40 different shades of their foundation, really from the get-go being the most inclusive brand and trying to pressure other brands to follow suit and recognizing that there are different skin tones and we should celebrate that. We don't all have to look the exact same. And so now we get to the 2020s, and there's a lot of conversation around mental health and beauty and that intersection. And brands are starting to focus on things like mindfulness, meditation, and stress-reducing routines in addition to what's there. And so that's really where we are today. Major brands are talking about these sorts of things. They're talking about racial inclusivity, gender fluidity, body positivity, in addition to mental health and mental awareness. And so, as we think about this overall trend, the question that I had as we were preparing was, is this a micro trend, something that is going to be around for a decade or two, and then we're going to revert back to the mean? Or do you think this is the beginning of a fundamental reshaping of how the world assesses beauty?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, in my opinion, I think there's this part of the market that has become so much more health conscious. So they're aware of, where the products they're buying are coming from, what ingredients are going into their products. And so I think this stems into beauty as well, right? I mean, this is kind of where the term like vegan or cruelty free came up within these products. And I think that's, really pretty recent in the past like decade or so that, really these consumers, these customers were really aware and trying to understand like, what does it mean that your product is vegan free or cruelty free, right? Especially when it comes to a beauty product. And so, I mean, I think it's really reshaping how the world views beauty. I mean, of course, you're going to have that, part of the market that's like the Victoria's Secret, fashion shows and all that. I mean, I remember as like a high schooler being like, oh, I want to watch that with my friends, see these models on stage and stuff. And, it is pretty incredible to see. But on the other hand, right, I think there's this really, fast growing part of the market that number one cares about what's going into their products. Number two cares about where they're coming from. And number three, like wants to connect with kind of the thought leader slash celebrity slash creator in the space that, has gone through, maybe some challenges in their own life or, they've become known for X, Y, and Z, whatever it may be, and they've now built this product because it, encompasses their lifestyle and reflects how they want to live. So, I think it's reshaping, but I think at the same time, it's like, still a pretty early trend, right? I think if you look overall at, cosmetic or beauty sales versus this subset of the market that is, vegan or cruelty free, I think it's, still a minority, not a majority, right?
Yeah, I think you're right. And whether we're in the process of changing, I think the beauty standards are going to change over decades, multiple generations. I don't think it's necessarily where uh, we're going to be completely different 10 years from now, but you can start to see things changing a little bit where just even look in pop culture, there's a lot more diversity than there was 50 years ago, just in the actors and actresses that we see. So it's a bit of an interesting one. But let's kind of dive into Rare Beauty and Selena Gomez in general. And I think before we get to the company, it would be helpful to understand a little bit more about Selena Gomez. I love her from Only Murders in the Building. Like, that's an awesome show, super funny. But before that, she did a lot of other stuff. You just want to walk us through kind of her biography?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think you know more about her than I do already, Aaron, but I've done a bit of research here. So she was born in 1992, and at only 10 years old, she began her acting career. In 2007, she kind of got her, big break here. She was the leading role on a TV show called Wizards of Waverly Place. Have you seen that? I've never seen it, so I'm not too
My
sure.
kids have seen it. I kind of missed it growing up. Like, it wasn't my show, but it's also
All
not
right.
my kids' show. But I'm aware of it.
Okay. So the show won 3 Emmy Awards, which is obviously huge. And it was one of Disney Channel's most successful shows that really made her a household name. So in 2008, just utilizing her high profile and following the path of countless other young Disney actors before her, she begins her singing career. And, her music career would really kind of continue to connect her original audience and help grow it. And, this is about the time where she starts dating Justin Bieber. Their relationship lasts about, a year and a half. I think that's also kind of helped propel her as well. Justin Bieber was, obviously a huge artist and still is today. But, I think this relationship exposed Selena and their private life quite a bit. And so it was just kind of this, I think, crazy rise to fame for her. But in 2013, she is diagnosed with lupus. And lupus is a chronic autoimmune disease that can cause inflammation and damage any part of the body. It basically happens when your immune system attacks your own tissues and organs. So pretty, crazy autoimmune disease. And the disease is also known to cause serious impact on a patient's mental health and cause, unpredictable flares and fatigue and pains. And so it did, greatly impact Selena's looks. And, as usual with most celebrities, this was thoroughly analyzed in media outlets. And so, 2015, she opens up to the media about her disease. And that year she cancels her tour to focus on her health. And then, 2017 is kind of really the like first step in her entrepreneurial career. She launches a series called 13 Reasons Why. And the series is based on a popular novel that follows the story of Hannah Baker, a high school student who takes her own life and leaves behind a series of cassette tapes detailing the reasons for her decision. And so each tape highlights, a specific person, an event that caused, mental health issues and trauma. And then in 2020, she releases Rare, which is kind of her, huge album, becomes #1 on the Billboard 200 chart in the US, making her third album to reach the top spot. So, I mean, by this point, she's already really a celebrity star. And 2020 is also the year that, Rare Beauty is founded. So it coincides with her album launch called Rare. So, I mean, it's pretty incredible, right? I mean, Selena Gomez, I think, is known by most people worldwide. And I mean, I think it's just pretty interesting to see how big an audience she has, how she's grown it, and how she, now has launched this incredible company of Rare Beauty.
Yeah. Do you think that, clearly, like when I hear you tell that story, this is a woman who had a lot of success, but was also suffering quite a bit, right? Like it was very clear. There were several years there where it was not a happy time or a good time to be Selena Gomez because she was pressured to act and behave a certain way. She's trying to conform to a standard of beauty. She's got this uh, public breakup. She's got this health disease that is very serious that she's dealing with. And so I think about like how they always joke about how the best artists are the ones that have the most tortured lives, and she definitely seems to have that a little bit, where she's has all this grit and all these things are happening. And I'm wondering, as you went through her biography, what do you think prepared her more, like her experiences in the public eye or her suffering in private, that helped her launch a company?
It's a really good question. I mean, I think in general, like everyone behind closed doors has their own challenges, right? I mean, Selena's kind of came to public because she's a celebrity, and she also decided to, disclose her challenges with, this autoimmune disease to the public. Um, so I mean, I think, look, any challenge is going to prepare you to be a founder, but I think even if you look at a startup, from the outside, it looks like it's so polished and everything's working well, and then you look on the inside, and it's like, how are they doing this? How is this coming together? And I think too, right? Like, it's not like Selena was necessarily a beauty expert, but she had gone through, these different challenges and changes with her autoimmune disease that, probably caused her in some sense to, look at her body differently. And that's what really led her to launch Rare Beauty. And I mean, she hired like, beauty experts to really,
Mm.
become part of the team. And I think it's worth noting some of these people. Aaron, do you want to kind of mention those people?
Yeah, so despite deciding that she was going to start a beauty company, like you said, she had no background in how to do this. And so she went out and find the right talent. So Joyce Kim, who is the chief product officer, was previously the VP of product at L'Oreal. And she also hired Scott Freeman, who is currently the CEO, also worked at L'Oreal and is a longtime industry veteran. Katie Welch, who's the chief marketing officer, worked with a lot of beauty and celebrity brands. And so, these are some folks that have a lot of expertise in this area. And so I think what was right about her, what was right about Selena, was she went out and find people who had the right expertise. And the most interesting thing to me is that she hired these people and they had a full year to work on this. It wasn't as if she said, "Hey, I've got a beauty company," and then she got a bunch of orders and then came in and did it. We talked about that on a previous episode of just like, if you're starting a company, throw it out there, see what kind of demand you get, and then figure it out afterward. She did the opposite. And I'm just want to get your perspective. What sort of benefit does having a team with the experience plus time give you when you're competing with other companies?
Yeah, I mean, I think at the end of the day, when you think of these creator-led brands, like every creator is going to need a team that has years experience to launch one of these brands as their back end, right? Whether it be, Logan Paul and Prime, or Jake with it's W, right? So I mean, they all have teams that are experts in, hydration products or deodorant or, chocolate in terms of, feastables, right? So I think it's a key component for the formula of like a celebrity led or creator led brand, where you've got to have a team. And I mean, I think for that year that they were preparing for launch, they were probably formulating, dialing in their suppliers, making sure their fulfillment's set up, stress testing their website, making sure their funnel and flow is working well. Maybe even testing like international shipment options. I mean, she has such a global audience that, they probably expected that from day one. So, I mean, yeah, I think it was such a key for her to bring on the right people. And I mean, I'm not sure if she necessarily went out and found these people herself. Probably someone on her team did, I would assume. But, she was aligned and understood like, hey, I need to bring in people that are beauty experts, that are cosmetic experts to do this right.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I mean, if you can afford it, you always want people who've done it before. And I think that, it's a two-way decision, right? These people who have had successful careers decided that they were going to leave those successful careers and go work for a brand that didn't exist. And you think about de-risking that for them. I think the big thing that would de-risk it if I was in their shoes was who was behind it. And I don't know if you're aware of this, but Selena Gomez has one of the most followed Instagram accounts in the world. It's a top 5 account in 2020 when they launched. And as of 2024, there are only 2 other people in the world, 2 celebrities, that have more followers than her. One is Cristiano Ronaldo, the KFC guy, and then Lionel Messi. And she has 424 million followers herself. And you think about that, 424 million. The population in the US is like 330 million. And so she has a massive following. She has a massive international presence. And you think about that sort of ammo to go in and launch something. I mean, you're close to a lot of creator-led brands. How does a massive following translate into an unfair advantage when it comes to launching a business?
Yeah, I mean, I think if they engage it and launch it properly, it's a huge advantage, right? Because you already have that audience that is a fan that really trusts you, that wants to support you. And so I think if you do it right, which she did, right? I mean, Selena made content of herself using rare beauty products, and this content was tailored to each of the platforms that she had such a large audience on. So it was like basically a free ads, if you will, and other brands would pay Selena like probably tens of millions of dollars for her to do this. But because it's her own brand and she's a large owner in the brand, she did this herself with her own audience. So I mean, it's just huge. I mean, if you think about it, like let's say the average CPM, which is like cost per thousand impressions on Facebook, maybe is like I don't know, $30. And you talk about, okay, she posts to 424 million followers, and let's say even like 10% of those people watch this video. So that's like, I'll round up, say around down 42 million people, right? So 42 million, I don't even know how to do the public math here, but 42 million people, if you're paying $30 as a CPM to reach 42 million people, that's going to cost you, millions of dollars. And so she basically enabled Rare Beauty to launch day one with millions of dollars of inherent audience, which is just incredible, right? If you do the back of napkin math, you're like, wow, this makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, $0 CAC sounds pretty good.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And so, I mean, I think a strong part of the brand success was not only launching online through their own store, but they also were big partners with Sephora in their stores across the US. And the brand did launch together with the Rare Impact Fund. And so this fund was established by Selena Gomez as part of her efforts to improve access to mental health services, especially for young people across the globe. Um, and so I think the goal really is to not only support Rare Impact Fund financially, but also raise awareness about what they've done. And so the initiative is also backed by 1% of all Rare Beauty sales, with additional funding coming from external donors. So, I mean, Sephora has made a big donation to the fund, and it's just pretty incredible. I mean, even this month on October 10th is World Mental Health Day, and so Sephora will be donating all of its Rare Beauty sales. So, pretty just incredible impact story here too, that I think they're able to lean into from a brand perspective. And I mean, it's like, I mean, this seems like a dream brand launch in some sense, right?
It does. I mean, mission driven plus huge following, something you can believe in, plus a vehicle to get the message out. I mean, it is a winning combination. And I think that there's an element here where the temptation for someone with a large following is to start selling airplanes and steaks and courses and neckties and whatever else you can think of. As you're talking with these creator-led founders, these celebrities, what would you tell them about what to do or not do in terms of protecting their personal brand?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think number one, the biggest challenge with these creators is finding like product audience fit, right? So you've got to find a product that really resonates with the audience. I think there's a lot of different ways to do that. You could basically test it through your existing, brand sponsors and trying to understand, okay, I know when I post about, this cosmetics brand versus when I post about this watch brand, the engagement is drastically different. Like people always ask me, where did I get this lotion versus where did I get this watch, right? So I think that's one telltale sign. I think the other is just, understanding, kind of what demographic your audience is. There's more kind of detailed social media reports that you could do to understand, okay, does my audience skew more male or female? What should we really be tapping into here in terms of enabling the product that I want to launch to resonate with my audience? So I think there's a lot of different ways to go about this, but I think most creators know their audience very well, and they'll have a strong understanding of what's going to resonate, with their audience. And so I mean, it's pretty remarkable to see how big rare beauty has gotten because beauty in general is hyper competitive, and there's so many different angles that a company can take. And so, I mean, what kind of choices did they make with their product and brand?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting because beauty is so competitive. I mean, the margins are high. It's a growing category. It's really relatively easy to start a brand, and so you have to have something that's different. You have to have a good product, but then you also have to have something unique about your brand and what it stands for. And they very clearly doubled down on this mental health piece. And because of Selena and her very public personal struggles, this is a very natural, very authentic thing that she would probably be pushing and emphasizing, even if she didn't have the brand. But the products themselves are known to be very well made. She did not skimp and get really cheap stuff, but they're at an attainable price point. So it's a very nice and approachable brand without being super premium, but also not bottom of the barrel from a quality perspective. They've talked about how when they were developing it, they wanted the product to feel weightless and be easy to apply, but it's got to be durable. It's got to hold up for events. You think about, Selena, if she's going to wear this, if she's going to live with it, she needs to make sure that it does well in a concert or on a photo shoot or whatever she's doing. And I think that by going and grounding the brand in mental health advocacy, they created a company that's always going to be top of mind. You think, just back to what you mentioned about the mental health day, that's something that they can celebrate every year forever, and people are always going to connect rare beauty with positive mental health. And so it's really an interesting piece here that they've struck on a very intelligent way to, one, be authentic with a major influencer, two, tie it to something that is important to people, and three, differentiate themselves in a very competitive market as a result.
Yeah, yeah, and I mean the company Milestones. We don't have too much data here, but I mean 2020 they launched, and basically the next data point that we have is that in 2023 they reported their revenue was $350 million, which is just incredible. I mean, 3 years to get to $350 million in revenue. I mean, that's like any founder's dream. So, I mean, Aaron, when you hear that, does that make you want to start like a creator led or celebrity led brand?
If Selena were to reach out and say, "Hey, I've got another idea," I take that phone call. Yeah,
Yeah. Well, I know, for example, like at Sourcify or at ISBA, right? We've done some work in the past with these creator-led brands, and I think the biggest challenge is forecasting, right? Especially upon launch, because you don't know if launch you're going to do $50 million or a million or 100,000, whatever it may be. You just don't know, and so I think the biggest challenge that I've seen, at Sourcify and from that context with these creator-led brands is you talk to these founders and they don't know how much they should order in inventory because they're just putting their cash into inventory before they even launch. And like, you're going to go raise, $5-10 million to start one of these brands. Are you going to go put $2 million of that in inventory? You're going to put, $250,000 of that in inventory. And so that I think is one of the biggest challenges is not understanding and not knowing, what's going to be the conversion rate when my celebrity partner goes to post. And I don't necessarily know if there's any like telltale signs here, but I think, look, at the end of the day, you want to be better prepared than not. And I always say, look, as long as your shelf life is long, you're going to eventually sell through that's kind of my take.
yeah. Well, I think that's a great question and one that we hear all the time. And I think it comes down to, are you building a brand or are you trying to sell product? And if you're building a brand, it's okay to be out of stock at the beginning. And I would actually encourage people to take a longer term perspective of this and say, all right, let's suppose I did raise 10 million bucks. I'm going to spend $200,000 on a very limited subset of product because I'm still testing and learning. And I want there to be enough out there that people can get it and they can use it. But it's also something where it's a bit of a scarcity thing. Like, we want it to be the cool new thing. You go back to the Nike example at the beginning, and if you come out of the gates with $20 million worth of inventory, well, suddenly you're going to sit on it. You're going to need to do different things. You're going to start to discount it. You're going to try to do anything you can to push it. But if you take a more conservative approach from a perspective of, hey, we're going to launch $100,000 worth, and then we're going to do a million, then we're going to do 5 million, then we're going to do 10 million, and you start to build the momentum of this brand, it makes sense. And it's okay if you're stocked out, you build the waiting list, etc. Whereas if you're a celebrity or an influencer that has a large following that's trying to sell product, well, you're really just going to come in and out, and if you don't have the inventory at that given point in time when it goes viral, you've kind of missed your opportunity. And so I think that's probably the big difference here is there's a lot of influencers that say they want a brand, but actually just want to sell product, and they're not thinking through it in those milestones that make sense.
Yeah, that's a good take too. What about their supply chain? Anything stick out to you there?
Yeah, there's a few things that are again very private company, and so not a whole lot's written about them. I think the two interesting things here are about their channel selection would be the first part. So they're currently only D2C and only Sephora, and so it's interesting that they haven't tried to push into Nordstrom's or Ulta or anything else like that. They've been very disciplined in where you get rare beauty, and have still achieved $350 million in revenue. So that's the first thing that's interesting. The second thing is just some of the sourcing that they're doing. It appears that most of their products, their actual cosmetics, are coming from South Korea. They do a lot of other sourcing from Europe and Asia for accessories, keychains, eyebrow pencils, things like that. But South Korea appears to be the place that they're doing this. And most of the time, when you are a brand that's launching a celebrity, styled product, you want your factory to be as close to your market as possible. And so I think that the natural thing here would be like, hey, you should have put this factory in the US. You should have been able to be reactive there. But then you look at, well, Selena's audience is global, right? And so any launch that she was going to do, even if she said this is only going to be available in the US, was going to be a global launch. And so, South Korea, well known for their high-end cosmetics. She's got a strong following in Korea. That is not a bad place to be as you go out and do that.
Yeah, it makes sense. I mean, when I look at a lot of cosmetic brands and you look at their import records, a lot is definitely coming from South Korea. I mean, I think they're just known for their cosmetics at this point, and I think a lot of consumers here resonate with that. That's for sure. And it's interesting because this is a cruelty-free, vegan-free brand, so you've got to be mindful of the supply chain because in order to say that, obviously you have to meet those requirements. If you were advising Selena on preparing for an exit, what would you be telling her?
Yeah, I think that she has to worry about too much of a valuation, right? Or being too big. There is a window here where brands are being purchased in this space. It's typically in the hundreds of millions of dollars up to the low single billions that these transactions would go for. At $350 million in revenue, the most up-to-date estimate is that the company's valued at about $2 billion in revenue and has a lot more runway there. And so there's a piece there. If she's going to sell, she probably needs to sell quickly. And I know that there's been some conversations about trying to do this, but the M&A market has been a little bit rough. If they get to be much bigger and they're looking for a 7, 8, 9, 12, $15 billion exit, that's going to be maybe too difficult for a L'Oreal or a MAC or someone to take on. And so that could be very challenging. And so at that point, it's really one of these things where you would look to say, okay, do we hold back a little bit and just focus on profitability, the brand, things like that, which I think they kind of are doing, which is shown by the fact that I'm sure Ulta is calling them saying, hey, can we please get some product? They're like, no, we're okay. We're going to stay where we are. But it's this piece here where you're in the exit window and they have to think about doing that. They could decide that they're just going to keep it private. She doesn't really need the money, I would imagine. But having a profitable company that you're the head of could be a great thing that could be there. But whether it's a private equity play, whether it's an acquisition, that's kind of what I would think about as they're going there. But they've done everything right. They're profitable. They're growing. They've got a strong brand in a crowded market that's growing in general. And so I think they're well positioned to exit.
Yeah, I would agree. One question that I have that I've heard different takes on is how much of Rare Beauty do you think Selena Gomez owns, right? I mean, I've seen different creators like Logan Paul and Prime, right? Logan doesn't own a majority of Prime. The company behind it, Congo Brands, does. Logan's a big partner, and so is KSI now, but he's not a majority owner. Do you think that's kind of the case here for Rare Beauty, or do you think that Selena Gomez actually owns a majority here?
It's a great question, and I think this comes down to something I talk to with founders all the time, is trying to understand how you're going to engineer the outcome that you want. Logan Paul probably didn't have $1 million or a couple $1 million that he was willing to set on fire to start his brand. So it made sense to partner with somebody who was willing to set that money on fire. Let's face it, that's what basically VC is you're willing to part with that money. And so in that sense, it's a matter of, the first question is, did Selena Gomez have enough money that she'd be like, hey, I'm willing to lose $5 million and not have anything to show for it to get this company off the ground? Let's assume that she did. So let's assume that she started and she said, okay, I'm going to fund this myself. I've been popular in lots of other ways. I can take care of this. Then the next question is, how do you invite people to join that company? You've got to pay them competitive market salaries, which, again, another cost there that goes into that previous calculation. But then there's probably some equity play for that team as well. And so you think about typical option pool is anywhere from 10 to 25%. And so I would imagine that that's been at least what she's given up on that end. And then, a lot of the stuff is private. So whether she's taken on additional financing or backers to fund the inventory, things like that. But I guess, like, as I walk through it, I would be surprised if she doesn't own the majority. Maybe it's 50% or around there of the company, just given on how it was built, how involved she's been, and where the company is today.
Yeah, it's an interesting take. I mean, maybe we'll see when they exit, they'll disclose, or we'll see in some financial reporting. But this is a pretty...
Selena, if you want to come on and tell us directly, we're happy to have you on. Just let us know. And we don't usually do guests, but we'll make an exception for Selena Gomez.
Exactly. Well, I like this trend of creator-led brands. I mean, if you got any hot takes on rare beauty, let Aaron and I know. We're always active on Twitter and LinkedIn, posting about e-commerce on tap. And we really appreciate you listening to this episode of E-commerce on Tap, brought to you by Sourcify and ISBA. Please like, subscribe, leave a review, share with a friend. We'd greatly appreciate it. And thank you again.